On this Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, we are talking about trading up. Reports of Memphis potentially being interested in moving as high as 3 with the Houston Rockets. Is that a good idea? Is there a player in this draft worth trading up for? What are you willing to pay, dear listener, dear viewer, if you are indeed willing to move up? Damichael and I will talk about that. Plus, we'll weigh in on the expansion of the WNBA and whether or not Memphis could support a WNBA franchise. All that and more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday to you and yours out there, wherever you're taking in the show. It is I, Joe Mullinax, joined by my wonderful co-host, Damichael Cole, and this is Locked On Grizzlies. You've made a good choice making us hopefully your first stop for NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption on this day, this wonderful Wednesday. Happy to have you with us. Damichael, a great show yesterday. We talked about a lot of fun things, and we kind of hinted at the idea of what would the Grizzlies be willing to spend, or what would we, if we were the GMs of the Grizzlies, be willing to spend in order to move up in this draft? And wouldn't you know it, perfect timing.
Right on cue.
A post on X from Evan Sittery, and the actual report was made by Kevin O'Connor in this age of aggregation, which in fairness, I am totally participating in right now. So the news came from Kevin O'Connor. Sittery shared it as well. The Rockets have been in trade talks with the Nets and Grizzlies about the number 3 overall pick. Houston is seeking Mikal Bridges, which, I wish Memphis was also seeking Mikal Bridges, while Memphis covets Donovan Clingan. Now, real quick, before we get into whether or not this guy is worth trading up for, can you imagine the victory lap I will take if this is indeed a true report? All this time that I've been Team Fee Fi Fo Fum, if Zach Kleiman is somewhere listening to this or watching this on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever he gets podcasts, maybe he's sitting there, like that Joe Mullinax, that bald bearded guy that talks with Damichael almost every day. He makes some interesting points. I too like Donovan Clingan. If that's what happens with Zach Kleiman, I'm going to probably be unbearable for that episode, partner.
You definitely would be. You definitely. You might come in here in a Jack and the Beanstalk outfit, screaming "Fee Fi Fo Fum,"
like a Paul Bunyan club, or
with your axe or something like that. I can see it. You got the facial hair.
I do have the beard. That's true. A lot more hair on the face than on the head. But we'll start off this episode, Damichael, about that report. And I'm curious as to your take on this, because we've talked about lots of different prospects in this draft.
Yeah.
We're doing our best to not make it, draft prospect and 3 prospects, 3 segments. To me, that kind of gets monotonous. We've talked about a lot of different types of players, and Clingan has probably been the one we've talked about the most. For me, as a Donovan Clingan guy, I'm firmly established as that.
Yeah.
The report of them trading up to 3 to get him makes me nervous, because we'll talk later on in the show about what we're actually willing to pay to get the guy. But for me, Clingan and trading up, yes and no. I am willing to trade up for Clingan. I'm not sure it's up to 3. I'm not sure they have to trade up for 3 or up to 3, and we'll talk more about that. But I'm curious as to your takeaway. You like Reed Sheppard, for example, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you talk about shooting and things that we need. Sheppard is clearly an elite 3-point shooter. Dalton Connect is another guy that we've talked about.
Yeah.
I don't know that you have to trade up for Connect, but you probably have to for Sheppard. Whether it's Clingan, another big, whether it's one of the prospects from Europe in this draft, even Alex Sarr. If there's somebody in this draft, say Sarr falls to 3, are you willing to trade up for anybody, even like an Alex Sarr in this draft? Or are you of the mindset, like there's reports of the Atlanta Hawks potentially trading number 1 overall to the Spurs, not having anything to do with Trae Young? The Spurs would want, the Hawks would want 4 and 8 in this draft. because they're thinking in this particular draft, maybe it makes more sense to have multiple bites at the apple as opposed to the first bite. So how are you perceiving this draft class? Is there anybody that you would trade up for?
So when we talk about trading up and we talk about the top 10, I'll say my short answer first. Short answer for me is no. And at the end of the day, though, this draft class, as we talked about, like we just talked about Kevin O'Connor's mock, right? Because that's where he put the report in the Grizzlies, and I think he had Khalil Ware going to the Grizzlies at 9, and under that pick, he said exactly, the Houston Rockets, the Grizzlies name in that report. But the thing about it is, Khalil Ware is projected to go 9 on his mock. You go look at another mock, you'll probably find him go 15, 16. Robert Dillingham is at 15 on his mock. You go find another mock, you'll find him top 5. Dalton Connett is I think 13th or 14th on his mock. He's 9 on ESPN's the recent one, right? They had him going to the Grizzlies. The point that I'm making is, outside of maybe a couple guys, and even those guys at the top, I don't think there's a clear all-star in there. It's probably going to be some all-star in there because math, but there's not someone that you look at and say that's a sure solid, he's going to be a top 2 player on a team, a championship type team in this draft. So with that being said, it goes back to what you were just talking about, John. If you look at it from a value standpoint, if you move up in this draft, because it's going to cost you, like these teams aren't, it's not going to be cheap to move up. If you move up, you better be doggone sure, that guy that we get, that is the piece we're missing. That is the guy who's going to be a surefire type player. And I don't trust that. That I have guys that I like, but all of them come with certain concerns. You mentioned Reed Sheppard. Love Reed Sheppard, but he's 6'2", 6'3". Is he a point guard? Is he a 2 guard? Is he undersized 2 guard like a CJ McCollum or something like that? When he was in Portland or whatever the case may be, there are some questions there. Same thing with Dalton Connett. He's 23 years old. What else is he going to do other than shoot at the NBA level? Ron Holland. I love the G League Ignite production, the scoring ability, but he didn't flash as a playmaker much. That stands out when you get to the NBA. The point that I'm making is, I don't see that surefire guy where you say that's the guy we want no matter what. We're going to trade up for him. Clinging to a certain degree, your guy, I would be willing to trade up for him, but how much are we willing to pay? We'll get to that later on. That's where the conversation gets a little bit tricky, because just in a small scope of this, I say you let the board play out, because somebody's going to fall. And I think Kevin O'Connor said that in his mock too. He's like, somebody's got to fall, and that's why he had Rob Dillingham going 15. We haven't even talked about Rob Dillingham much, quite frankly, because I've just expected him to be off the board by the time the Grizzlies pick. And that was the first time I've seen him as low as 15, on a mock draft. So the point is, somebody's going to fall. And you just let that player or those 2 or 3 players fall into your hands that you'll choose from, more so than go up and be aggressive for a guy that you're not certain is going to be the guy for you.
And if you're taking bets in terms of guys that are most likely to fall, in my opinion, Clingan is a perfect fit, near perfect fit for what Memphis is trying to do and their window of trying to compete. But he's a big who does not have proven outside shooting range. Yeah. He seems kind of like a dinosaur in some ways, depending on how you perceive modern NBA offense. I could see him being the guy that falls. That makes a lot of sense to me. Your point about no pure or true superstars, it rings pretty strong for me. We talk about Alex Sarr potentially being the best prospect in this draft, possibly going number 1. If his comp is Jaren Jackson Jr. is a fringe all-star, right? Yeah, and I don't mean that as a knock on Jaren. Jaren has been an all-star in the past. But I do believe that there's something to the idea of where is the value, right? It's all about opportunity cost. Are you willing to move on from what it's going to take to secure the services of that guy? I think I'm willing to trade up to 6 if I'm sure that the 2 guys in front of me at 9 are going to try to take Clingan. Yeah. I don't think I move up to 3
That's a
for
big leap.
for Klingon even. I don't know as a Klingon guy if I do that. And I'll talk about why here coming up next, and I'm sure Damichael will as well. What are you willing to pay? Because it's not going to be cheap. And oh, by the way, the team that is picking at number 3 overall is one of the teams in your division that you are going to have
play
to
them
go
4 times
in order to get to where you're trying to go. So that, spoiler alert, that's one of my pieces of thought heading into what are you willing to pay to move up if these reports are true and the Grizzlies are in that mix. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by BetterHelp. Everybody carries burdens. We all have different stressors. Size doesn't matter. Big, small. If we keep these things bottled up, they're going to start to affect us negatively. They can weigh us down. Therapy is a safe space where you can get these kinds of things off your chest and figure out how to work through your issues. Positive coping skills can be developed, how to set boundaries in your work and personal life. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just for somebody who's had to experience some major life trauma. There is benefits to therapy for all of us. If you're starting or thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time with no additional charge. Find somebody to help get things off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. When we come back here on Locked On NBA, or Locked On Grizzlies, I should say, what are you willing to pay to get up in this draft? Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole. We are talking NBA draft rumors. Kevin O'Connor and others are talking about Memphis potentially being in the market to move up in the 2024 NBA draft, which is now just 3 weeks away or so, roughly, give or take. We can also talk about the 2 nights thing another time, Damichael. I'm curious as to your take on that. I think it's entirely unnecessary, but that's all right. I guess the NFL, it's the most sincerest form of flattery is imitation. So we can talk more about that another time. But the NBA draft is about 3 weeks away, and you're looking at a situation with Memphis potentially trying to move up. What's it worth to you, right? Like, what are you willing to pay? Because I want to start off this conversation with the realization, it was the Nets, the Rockets, and the Grizzlies that are part of this Kevin O'Connor rumor kind of thing. And the idea of Mikal Bridges, who has long been sought after by Grizzlies trade aficionados like me, the idea of Mikal Bridges going to Houston is part of a deal, right? Because theoretically that could happen. Memphis gets 3, Mikal Bridges goes to Houston, Brooklyn gets a bevy of young players and draft picks, right? Like that. Theoretically possible. Say Jalen Green goes to Brooklyn or something like that. I don't know if that's what the Nets want, but that's neither here nor there in this hypothetical. The thing that I'm struggling with, Damichael, is that means you're helping the Houston Rockets get Mikal Bridges. If that happened that way. Now, obviously, Memphis could do business with Houston individually to get up to number 3, but even then you're trading with Houston. So maybe Mikal Bridges isn't getting what isn't getting to the Rockets, but you're still giving them additional draft picks. You're still giving them, God forbid, a G.G. Jackson or a Vince Williams Jr. And to be honest with you, if I was Houston, that would be the first name I'm bringing up because the Grizzlies aren't going to trade Bane, Ja, or Jaren. That defeats the purpose. But if I'm the Rockets, I'm looking and saying, oh, you've got a good-looking 19-year-old that everybody says would be a lottery pick in this draft.
Yeah.
Seems intriguing to me. How about him and 9 and a future first beyond that? And that's too much for me. That's too much with any other team in the NBA, but it's especially too much with a division rival that you're going to have to play 4 times to compete in the Western Conference. Like I said earlier, I think I would give up, 9, a second rounder in this draft, and maybe a future first to move up to 6. Like a protected future first.
Yeah.
I think to move up to 6 and secure Klingon, if he tumbles a little bit that way, I think I'm willing to do that. But I don't know that I'm willing to pay the cost of a good young player plus multiple first-round picks. If I'm Houston, that's what I'm asking for. Isn't that what you would be asking for?
Yeah. If you're trying to move into the top 3, you're gonna pay a pretty penny. I mean, think about Houston's perspective here. Like, that's what I always go back to, because if we only look at this from the Grizzlies lens, you're going to come up with these outrageous trade scenarios that don't make any sense. But when you think about Houston's perspective, look at it like this: Houston is right on the cusp of contending. They feel like a couple moves here and there, they're going to be there. Mikal Bridges away. They have the young talent, so they have this idea that they got their coach now. Emi Udoka is really coming there, change the culture. They're tougher. They play defense. I mean, a couple years ago, it was easy pickings. When the Grizzlies played Houston in terms of scoring, it ain't that way anymore. Now they just added a guy like Steven Adams, so they're going to be even tougher. They got the perfect combination of those tough vets, the Dylan Brooks, the Fred VanVleets, Uncle Jeff Green, went over there. And you got that mix combined with that young influx of talent. Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, Jabari Smith. The point is, they don't have to settle for anything. They can stand pat and say, that's all you want to give us? Okay, we'll move on. Just add the number 3 pick to the litany of young value that we have that they can cash in on at any point. Like if they want Mikal Bridges, they can get him. It's just, how are they going to do it? I remember, like, one thing that I always point back to is, remember when they signed Dylan Brooks? And a lot of people were like, man, that was a big contract. Except Joe Mullinax. Joe Mullinax told you that Dylan Brooks was going to get that deal.
I did tell everybody that. I did, yes.
You did. And when he got that deal, the first thing that popped in my mind, in my basketball mind, was that's a perfect deal to potentially leverage in the future if you want to get, I didn't think Mikal Bridges, but like that 20 plus million a year. Oh, that's perfect. Just throw that into a nice deal. And, that's your movable contract. So looking at it from that lens, here's the thing. I think Houston, one, because it's Memphis. Like we're talking about the Grizzlies and the Rockets being in a deal together. You don't want to help Houston, but Houston doesn't want to give Memphis that. I mean, they just traded away Steven Adams to Houston.
Memphis is not a dumb front office. No, if there's rumors that they are hell-bent on trying to get one particular dude because they think he fixes everything for them, they're not going to try to help unleash Ja Morant in that way.
Exactly. And that's my point as well. So the thing is, I think you said it perfectly. I could see them trading up to 6 or 7 if seeing how the board falls. If Clingan isn't drafted in the top 5, now you're making some phone calls and you're saying, hey, we'll give you 9. We'll give you a future protected first. I say top 10 protected probably would be fine. Maybe top 5 protected, just because you would like to think that, if the Grizzlies are healthy going forward, top 5, they're not going to be anywhere near that. So you make it sound good for them. Yeah, we'll give you a top 5 protected pick, whatever the case may be. And that should be enough. Maybe you throw in a future second or something like that. But I think that's as far as I'm willing to go to move up. One, because I don't see that surefire guy. I see guys that I like. I like Donovan Clingan and his potential fit in Memphis. But at the same time, here's what I'm talking about when I talk about the talent gap. My question would be to those who are willing to trade up and do whatever it takes to get a Donovan Clingan, is the price that it would cost a big enough difference from the talent of a Donovan Clingan to a Khalil Ware, to a Zach Edey, to a whatever big that you like after him. Most people know the big after Clingan to me I like is Ware. So I don't think there's a massive talent gap there in terms of how they would fit on the Grizzlies. So I'm not really willing to give up too much in that case scenario.
The fascinating thing for me is how much Dan Hurley, the head coach of UConn, that system that they've installed, how much of it is a system, right? The concern about being a system player. For Clingan, obviously that applies to Stephon Castle as well, or at least it should. If you're going to give that to Clingan, that should be a Castle worry as well. I see the talent argument, and I do think that you're onto something there. My concern is Memphis going to be in a position where they're going to overpay for something, and then the Washington Wizards wind up taking Donovan Clingan anyway? Like, what if at number 2, the Wizards are like, all right, Clingan's our guy, and now we traded up. Who are we going to take? Reed Shepherd, who can't play with Ja Morant? Super, right? Like it's a challenging situation to be in. Let us know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think there's a line? Do you think there's something that you're not willing to go too far to pay? Are you willing to just write off a trade with Houston overall because it's a trade with Houston? I think I'm going to have nightmares about Damichael's point about the Dillon Brooks contract. I hadn't even thought about that aspect of it.
Yeah.
But you're exactly right. If you are the Brooklyn Nets and you're thinking, okay, it's time to tank, and they're willing to give you 3 in this draft, plus another first rounder or 2, plus the hilarity of Dillon Brooks, who, again, first off, he'll be wonderful to watch, right? He'll be super fun.
You throw him in for the salary. Yeah.
Yeah, but he still can eat 35 minutes.
Exactly.
And as what was a strength of Dillon Brooks when he was in Memphis? Helping establish the culture. For 3 years, if you don't care if you're bad or not, what are we talking about? Like, that's a perfect guy to put there. And then when his contract's expiring or when it expires, you just move on. Thank you for your service, Dillon. That's scary to me. I didn't even think about that. I think McAllister.
I'm telling you, look, everybody talks about OKC and their future. I'm peeking over there in Houston and looking like, from an asset standpoint, it looks different because they don't have all the first rounders that OKC has, but they have all these young pieces that they can just throw out. Like, they have too many, really. Like with Eason and Jabari and the list goes on. Like, this isn't Locked On. This isn't the Rocket Show. You go listen to Jackson talk about them all the way. But at the same time, that's why when we talk about these Grizzlies points, we're talking with so much urgency because the West is just loaded.
It's very scary in the Western Conference. I'm terrified. Mikal Bridges, you might be a Houston Rocket. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but Damichael just made a very convincing argument for it to happen. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to close out the show, moving away from the NBA draft for a moment, heading into the WNBA. It's been in the news the last couple of days for reasons we're not going to talk too much about, but it did get me thinking whether or not Memphis could support a WNBA team as the league continues to expand. Damichael, obviously there in Memphis, beat writer for the Memphis Grizzlies for the Commercial Appeal. He has a wonderful view on that, I'm sure, and I'm looking forward to hearing it momentarily here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, it's been a fun conversation with Damichael, as it always is. We're not yelling at each other. This isn't Fox Sports. This isn't ESPN. We're not talking heads using inappropriate language too often. I think I only say the lowest tier curse words here on Locked On Grizzlies. But the point is, we're not creating drama for the sake of drama, right? Locked On Grizzlies is a place where you come for analysis, good sports conversations, and that certainly continues on Locked On Sports Today, which is the first of its kind 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. You can also check it out on Amazon Fire under the free channels app or portion of the app. All of the great Locked On teams like myself and Damichael, other awesome programs, plus Locked On NBA, Locked On NHL with the Stanley Cup coming up, all sorts of different ways to get your sports fix. So when you're done with Locked On Grizzlies, go check out Locked On Sports Today. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. And Damichael, I know you know this, winner take all time NBA Finals previews are coming out. I have a sneaky suspicion you might be talking about that on our Thursday edition of the podcast. Stanley Cup coming up. FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own, whether it's the NBA or NHL. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's right, $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. Go check out FanDuel.com/lockedon right now and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, closing out this Wednesday edition of the show, taking a look at the WNBA and possible expansion into Memphis, hypothetical expansion into Memphis. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, wonderful co-host Michael Cole, alongside with me, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal, award-winning, goodness gracious, that's a mouthful, award-winning beat writer for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. We've had a great show so far talking about the NBA draft, the rumors of Memphis potentially moving up in this draft, but we're going to close out on the WNBA. And I want to stress Pat McAfee and curse words and
Yeah, Stephen A.
People calling out Stephen A. Smith on ESPN. McNutt, I think, is her last name.
Yeah, Monica McNutt. Yeah.
Monica McNutt, thank you. Who's we've had? I think I've had her on the show before. Just talking with those folks and seeing the expansion of the WNBA, the fact it's in the national consciousness more than it ever has been, whether that's because of Caitlin Clark or because of the fact the league has just been built up over the last 5 years. The numbers have been growing before Caitlin Clark. That's important to point out. Has Clark magnified it? Maybe. But again, the league has been much more successful over the last several seasons. There's no denying that. Expansion was being talked about in the WNBA before Caitlin Clark.
Mm-hmm.
With that in mind, obviously the WNBA continuing to look at it. I think they've announced some expansion teams, but
Yeah.
there could be more down the road. Damichael, you know as well as I do that Memphis loves the game of basketball. The NBA Finals will be happening over the next couple of weeks. And when they put out the ratings for the NBA
Memphis
Finals,
will
I
be in there.
promise in the top 10 in terms of rating share, Memphis is going to be there because Memphis loves basketball. That's one of my favorite things about the city. Do you think Memphis could support a WNBA team? Everybody talks about Nashville and that sort of thing and them getting a WNBA franchise. Do you think Memphis, if given the opportunity, could support a WNBA team?
Man, see, the thing is, there's a business and there's an emotional part to this, you know? Like, and that's where I have probably differing opinions from the emotional side, without a doubt. I definitely believe so. Uh, Growing up here, I went to a lot of high school girls basketball games that were as crowded, that were as talked about as some of the boys games. During the mid 2000s and those days, we've had some really good players come from the area. I went to a high school at my high school where the girls basketball team was a perennial state contender, and their games would be more packed sometimes than even the boys games. So I think Memphis as a city, definitely from the emotional standpoint, what they buy in, what they come, all of that can be achieved here. Of course, there's gonna, they're gonna have to get the support, and on a deeper level, tying it back with the Grizzlies, Jaren Jackson Jr. We just saw him a week or so ago at a LA Sparks game. Ja Morant, we've seen him, wear the hoodies. Jaren Jackson Jr.'s mom is works in the WNBA for the Players Association. So many connections there in terms of where we know the Grizzlies would support them, which would be big. That is big, and they would have that support. So I think from that standpoint of it, it makes all the sense in the world. Now the business side of it, that's where things get a little tricky. We see right now in Memphis, with the Liberty Bowl, things going on with the stadium deal there, with the FedEx Forum leasing stuff, with all these things. There are a lot of moving parts right now on the business sports landscape in Memphis, where I probably believe that the idea of bringing another team to Memphis is probably not even in the forefront of that conversation for them. Why they, this FedEx Forum leasing stuff, takes place. Why the Liberty Bowl goes under construction and get some upgrades here really soon, and whatever else they want to do. But I think all of those things are kind of front and center right now, and that's why I don't think it'll happen. You did mention that the W is adding, two teams. They're going to add a team, in Canada next season, and then they're going to add another team in the Bay Area. So that's two more teams that are coming to the W soon. I believe that'll put them at 14. I would think that 16 would be a neat number. So you probably look at potentially maybe a couple more. I know Kathy Engelbert, the commissioner over there, she talks about it a lot. And when I was working in Philly and covering a little bit of those WNBA topics, because Philly was a city that was kind of, in a way, talked about a lot in terms of picking up a WNBA team because of their size, and all of that. But it would be fun if we had a W team here. Like, I mean, the first thing that I could think of is the relationship between the Grizzlies and that team would be amazing. As long as Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., and those guys are at the front, I mean, I could see them being at a lot of those games and forming a real nice relationship there, where I think, like, I just looked the other day, like Kevin Durant was at a Phoenix Mercury game. I know Devin Booker's been going to a lot of, like, him, Diana Taurasi have like a neat relationship. there as well. We've seen it in LA, at times with Lisa Leslie. He used to play with the Sparks and, Kobe Bryant, Shaq, and those things. So I like the idea of it from the emotional side, but the business side, with so much already going on in Memphis, I don't see them wanting to do that.
It definitely seems like they're doubling down on the teams that are already there, right?
Yeah.
The Grizzlies and the Tigers and, the football program in Memphis being such a major piece of that. The college factors in Memphis, for those of you that have never been to Memphis, obviously a large portion of our audience is Memphis regional, but we do have some international and some folks that are national. The college there, before the Grizzlies ever got there, it was just the Memphis Tigers, right? And the Tigers were the biggest show in town. And you could argue with Penny Hardaway and that sort of thing. They still kind of are in the eyes of many Memphians, even though Memphis has embraced the Grizzlies, especially over the last 10 years or so. I tend to agree with you. I think the WNBA relationship would be really cool in Memphis. I think that there's a lane to make money there because the city is so basketball hungry. Yeah. But I tend to agree that you want to make sure that the Memphis Tigers are okay. And as college sports continues to shift, they need to be in a better position to be sucked up by one of these major conferences, because if they're not, it's a game of musical chairs where the team that's left out is going to be really out of luck. So I think that as amazing as a WNBA investment would be, and maybe you could argue why not both, right? But I for the long-term health of Memphis sports, the Tigers and the Grizzlies too, with the update with the building and the lease and that sort of thing. But the Tigers in particular at this time, having lived in Memphis, followed that sports scene for over a decade now, the Tigers are really a major piece of the heartbeat of that, and that needs to be strengthened. I think you're right, but it's nice to dream. It's a cool idea.
It would be fun.
Absolutely,
it would be really fun.
Thank you guys for being with us on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. On our next episode of Locked On Grizzlies, I don't know if you know this or not, Damichael, but the NBA Finals are coming up. Maybe some finals predictions. We can take a look at how Xavier Tillman has done up in Boston, a chance to win a ring for X. That would be pretty cool. So lots of different angles we can take as the NBA Finals approach.
Yeah, that's exactly. You just hit it off. That's the starting point for me, because I'm not going to say why, but we haven't seen Xavier Tillman much in his playoffs. I think this is the series. This is a series kind of made for the X that we saw in Memphis. But we'll talk about it tomorrow.
I can't wait to read all the think pieces about Xavier Tillman defending Luka Doncic. It's going to be interesting. And when the trade went down, that was X can defend lots of different types of guys. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And it's just nice to see X be in that mix. So NBA Finals preview. I think that's a safe bet for the Thursday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you guys so much for being with Damichael and I on this episode. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get podcasts, on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, whatever the case might be. Make Locked On Grizzlies your first stop each and every time an episode drops. We look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, he's Damichael. I'm Joe. This is Locked On Grizzlies. Stay locked in. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll catch you next time here on Locked On Grizzlies. See ya.